we get started, I'm just going to give you a little introduction. Welcome. And this is the very first of a series of conversations that I'm wanting to create. I'm introducing a diversity of women to each other through the connection of the story, or a very small part of a story of one woman. And this has been born out of a desire and passion of mine to create connection across diversity of like-minded women who can just foster more of a sense of community, which is in many regards very lacking in our world today, of true community, of true connection and community. So what is beautiful about, before I run you through what the order of the hour is going to look like, what I found quite interesting and beautiful is that today happens to be the March equinox, which is, and not only the March equinox, but actually a particularly significant one. So on the 21st of December in 2020, we had the conjunction of Jupiter. Meghan, you can correct me if I'm incorrect, but I think it was Jupiter and Saturn had a big conjunction in December. And that was really a big marker for something new being ushered in. And that newness is happening on many, many different levels. So today's conversation, the beauty of it is that with this next equinox being the 20th of March, it's also a particularly significant one in this new initiatory period that we're moving into in the world. And so the words, as I've been reflecting about this conversation we're going to have today, the words that have kept coming up over and over for me have been those of culmination and new beginnings. And as it so happened, it wasn't by design that we're having this meeting. The conjunction, the equinox happened just a couple of hours ago, the exact conjunction, and obviously it expands, we feel the impact on either side for days, weeks, and what have you. But this is actually the pinnacle of this particular event. So in terms of what it means for us today, for me particularly, it's very beautiful in terms of launching this new initiative and this new project. But for all of us, what it means is that this creates a new backdrop. It is actually a very much an initiatory period for us. It also happens to be the beginning. It marks the beginning of the astrological year, which runs from March to March, from equinox to equinox in March. And so it's a very, very powerful moment for setting new intentions. And we don't necessarily, I know I sometimes grapple with that, well, what intention do I want to set? But our heart knows it doesn't need to be about having to write anything down. We might if we want to. It's about, more than anything, just tuning into ourselves and connecting into what it is that our heart most desires and wants for us as individuals, as women, and as humanity. So welcome on this auspicious day, at this auspicious moment. So you may be wondering why I've called the series of conversations Coming Home. Now, home is taking on a whole new significance, and even again in the last few days, in some of the people that I follow that I very much love, the word home and coming home has been coming up over and over. And initially, the conversation with Meghan was going to be titled Coming Home. And then I decided that no, actually this whole series of ordinary conversations with extraordinary women, or extraordinary conversations with ordinary women, whichever way you want to put it, would be called Coming Home. Now, a few years back, I started the wheels in motion for creating a women's leadership center, and the slogan for that, and I put it on the back boiler. It's been working in my heart, but in terms of manifesting it out in the world, I put it on hold for some time. But the slogan for that was the journey to the center, and the center being the heart, the center being where home is. And so that is why the theme of these conversations is home. And today we'll be engaging with each other. We'll be on various different ways, but really the thrust of this conversation is going to be around just getting to know, through a part of the story of Meghan, a little bit more about each other and ourselves. So the order in which we're going to do things, just to give you a little bit of context, is I'm just going to start with a few housekeeping matters. Silvia, anyone is welcome to help me. I am far from a technological expert. I have very little idea of how this all works, but we will do it anyway. And then I will be reading a poem on homecoming, written by a very precious friend of mine in New Zealand, recently written by a very precious friend of mine in New Zealand. And from there, I will ask you ladies, Angelica, Silvia, and Jana, I've invited as studio guests. I'll ask you a few questions just by way of introducing yourselves to us. And then I will go on to introduce Meghan and ask Meghan to introduce herself. And then we'll move into a conversation just for about 10-15 minutes between Meghan and myself, just to keep the focus on that, and then open up the conversation to all of us. And I will let you know how to engage in the conversation when we do that. And then we will close, and I'll explain more around that and give you more information that might be of interest during our closing as well. So usually when we start a conversation or something, I like to do a little bit of sort of meditation or centering. And this poem will serve that purpose for us today. So the poem is called Homecoming, and it's written by Mary Walker, a poet in New Zealand. Homecoming. After a long time unmoored, living alongside yourself rather than in yourself. On seeing this and feeling suddenly homesick for something you didn't know existed. Peace. You might long to rush it yourself, dive headlong into the safety of home, and wonder why you keep missing. Wonder why you and your life keep floating away from each other. Knowing that the anchor was thrown too far from the boat all that time ago. Reunion can't come soon enough. Still, it takes time to reacquaint, time to trust the tide that was always trying to take you home, and that will pick you up and return you yet. So just taking a few breaths and letting the words of that poem sink in. And from there, we're going to move on to have an introduction of our beautiful, wonderful studio guests. I'm so appreciative of that have agreed to be here today. Angelica, Adamski, Silvia, Schuh, and Reid. And I just want to share But I obviously, since I invited you, have some connection with each of you. It differs. With some of you, I have more than one type of connection. And so I might just briefly mention that. Angelica, I met through a group I created last year called Into the Heart Conversations. Silvia and I studied CTI, we're on a CTI leadership program in Spain in 2015, which is where we initially met. And we've also gone on to do intuitive kind of training together. Janet was part of that training as well. And when I put out the invitation, Janet, we've never met before, we've never spoken before, as far as I know. And Meghan also has been part of a couple of groups, a training and a group that another group that I created as well. So there is some interconnectedness between us. And of course, we're also spanning a few continents and countries, which is truly wonderful. So without any ado, I'm just going to ask the three of you to give a brief introduction of yourself by way of letting us know where you're from, where you're located in the world, and telling us something just in a few sentences that might be of interest to us to know about you. So whoever would like to is welcome to start. You'll have to, of course, unmute.
Sure, I'll start, if that's okay.
Did
you want to go, Angelique?
No, please, Silvia, you go ahead.
Thank you. So thank you, Guiomar, for inviting me to be here today. I was very curious to this. I love the poem that you read in the beginning, because if I can summarize everything I have lived up to now and that I'm living, it's really this journey of coming home to myself and uncovering all these different parts in myself that I wasn't aware of. I wasn't aware that I was actually protecting them or shielding them or hiding them. And every time I'm uncovering and integrating one further part of me, it just feels good, and it makes more of my real me come out for the better of everyone around me, hopefully for the world. And I think that's what defines me. I mean, in terms of backgrounds, I'm a bit of an odd bag. I'm Austrian. I live in Switzerland. I live in Switzerland because this is where my work is. I'm a researcher in particle physics. And at the same time, I am a coach. I do a lot in leadership development. I'm doing a lot in thinking about how we can actually work better together, no matter where we work. And that's where all this intuitive training that Guiomar has also mentioned is also very useful. So I'm integrating all of that, and it's part of my coming home, all of this. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Silvia. And of course, we share a fairly long connection, probably the longest of all of us here. Lovely to have you here with us today. Angelica or Janet, go ahead when you're ready.
Maybe I should go next. And thank you, Silvia, for that beautiful introduction. I think I so fully agree with you that it's all about homecoming and where is home and what is home. And I've got a very similar background like yours, Silvia, because I have worked on the professional side mainly. My profession has taken a very big part of my life, but I'm also a woman, I'm also a mother, I'm also a daughter, I'm also a friend, and I have worked in most countries in the world and lived in 12 of them on 3 continents. So for me, it's also a physical homecoming. And I was born in Sweden, but decided that I had to settle in one place. I haven't really succeeded to settle, but the place of my heart is really South Africa. So that's where I am right now, even though I'm still actually working globally and traveling as much as possible under these circumstances. I've done a lot of leadership training. I'm also coach trained. I've led big groups of staff in my career where you have to be very intuitive to get the best out of people's hearts. Because that is really what life is about, to come home and to get the best out of people when you can. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Angelica. And there's so much about you I don't know myself because we haven't had that many personal conversations, but so lovely to hear about all the countries of the world that you've lived in. Thank you.
Well, I was going to say good morning. It's morning for me, but good day for everyone else. I am right now in Colorado. This has been my heart home for a very, very, very long time. I came here when I was 18 and I keep coming back. I have been working with corporations as a consultant in change management and also as a coach. And it's been fabulous. I go in and I meet new people, new industries, new projects. I love that. And there's also that bittersweetness where you kind of make a home in a project team, and then it's time for you to leave and move on. And I'm also I'm excited about this talk because the past year, even though most of us were locked down, I was traveling. I went to the Netherlands for 3 months to see my first granddaughter. And that's been wonderful. And we're actually leaving Colorado for a month to go to California. So there's this sense of taking my home with me. So I'm excited to be here and be surrounded by such beauty and strong women of the world. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Thank you, Janet. And what a treat to meet you. I've seen your name in a few different places, but I haven't ever had the privilege of meeting you. So thank you for joining us today. I much appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to, in a minute, move on to introducing Meghan, who interestingly, I also know very little about. We've had a couple of conversations, and as I mentioned before, we have had, we've belonged to a couple of different groups, be it training or groups where we come together. And what led me to invite Meghan today was really just a synchronistic moment where I knew that this is what I wanted to create, and an opportunity arose where I felt that Meghan should be the first person that I would like to interview. I felt the first time I had a one-on-one conversation with Meghan was a few years back when we were doing some training. We were doing intuitive work for each other, and I immediately felt just the power of her presence, of who she is as a spirit, as a soul, and have just found that she has re-entered my life several times. And here we are today to have this conversation. I asked Meghan to join the conversation because something drew my attention a few months back in one of our conversations, and also seeing some of her posts on Facebook, that Meghan had decided to, she is from Rhode Island, and she's back there now, I believe, but she decided to sell up her house and everything and just leave, and not really knowing why, as far as I understand. But Meghan, you'll tell us more about that, and go on a journey. And I was super curious to know more about that. Given that this thing of leaving home, I think all of us at some point feel, I don't know, I certainly do, that in my life, at times in my life where I just wish I could leave everything, just drop everything that weighs me down or that holds me back, and just be free to express myself as I wish to, and perhaps live a completely different existence to the one that I've had until now. So without any ado, I'm just going to ask, though, we'll start the conversation. I'll start the conversation with Meghan. I'd just like to ask if Angelica, Silvia, and Janet, if you wouldn't mind just stopping the video so that then you can see more clearly, and also so that there isn't interference. And then I'll invite you to switch your video back on once we open up the conversation to everyone. So anyway, Meghan, here we are, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to welcoming you, and you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself, so perhaps you'd like to start just with a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure, yeah. I don't think we've even talked about this, but I am a CTI leadership graduate and a coach.
Okay.
So
I wasn't even aware of that, so that's lovely to know. We have some more shared history.
Yeah. My background has been in a lot of different types of healing modalities. I come from a very spiritual perspective, and I've been in the corporate world. I've been lucky enough to be able to opt out of that. I've been able to follow my heart in the work that I've done. I've done a lot of different jobs, and it always comes back to doing healing work and working with individuals.
Okay, beautiful. So, Meghan, you're based in Rhode Island, and now I can't claim to have a great knowledge of the USA, but I gather that is somewhere near New York.
It is, yes, it is. Yes. It's in between New York and Boston.
Right, okay. And is it an island? Excuse my ignorance of American.
Well, no ignorance there, but the state is not an island, but I do live on an island that's in the state. So there's a lot of Native American land around here. So they have a lot of Indian names, but I do live on an island inside the state of Rhode Island.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, beautiful. So I'm guessing that Rhode Island gets its name from the islands that are there.
I don't, Isle of Rhodes is what it means, and I'm not sure. It's RHODES, and I don't know the history of the terminology, but that's what it is. It's actually where settlers came here. Roger Williams came to Rhode Island, and he was the one that came from England for religious liberty. So there's a very, very, very far back history in the land.
Oh, wow.
Back to the origins of the United States.
Back to the
origins of the United States.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah. Well, I'd be interested to know more. Interestingly, in South Africa, we also have a prominent Rhodes name, Cecil John Rhodes, who was instrumental in actually, I don't know the history too well, but was quite instrumental in a lot of what was created in South Africa. I'm sure some of the others might know a bit more. Well, Angelica might know, because I think he was in the mining world primarily, and Angelica has links to the mining world, but a very, very prominent figure in South African history as well. So the name links across to here as well.
Yeah, neat.
Yeah. So Meghan, what really I wanted to engage in this conversation with you about today is something about your journey on deciding to sell up your home and leave home. And I'm not going to be too directive in terms of what we talk about. I'm happy just to have an open conversation around what comes up. But particularly, with an interest to what decided you to do it, what led to it, and what you found in the months that you were traveling, what challenges came up and what gifts and opportunities arose as well.
That's wonderful. First of all, I'm thrilled to be invited to be here, and it's given me the opportunity to reflect on that, I've been taking for granted, because I've been with myself this whole time. Like, I'm the only constant that I'm the one that knows my story. I'm the one that had my experiences. So this has really given me an opportunity to share. So thank you. This morning I'm in my car because part of this coming home trip is, being, working with the environment that I find myself in. Now I come back to the town I lived, and I don't, some of the housing situation, like the Wi-Fi, is not strong. So I find myself continuing to have my home experience coming home, even though I'm back where I started. It's still the last bits of my journey still stay with me. Really,
perhaps
what
you could take us back to when you left home and,
yeah.
How long you've been away and when you came back.
Well, I left home in August of last year, and it was very easy to sell my home
Mhm.
because where I live is very popular. And I had been unhappy for a number of years, so I didn't know how I was going to move myself, because I had such a lovely home. It was beautiful, and there was nothing to change about it, but I wasn't happy. So I knew that it was going to happen. I just didn't know when. And the moving process was very easy. I felt very supported. Everything was without difficulty. I got rid of my furniture and lots of possessions, and it seemed there was a story for every single piece of furniture that went to the right person. So I felt very supported when I was leaving. And when I was driving across the United States, and I'm really giving an overarching view of the last 5 months. When I was driving across the United States, I went to Colorado, and I was going to meet up with Janet, but she told me she was leaving. And so that was unexpected, and I is also perfect. So when I was driving across, I felt myself, for 20 years, I had been prioritizing things other than myself. So when I was driving across the country, I felt an unwinding of all of the choices I had made. And I was getting down to the core of being with myself. So when I was on the road, I was experiencing a lot of what was true about me. There was no one there to influence me. There was no one there to answer to. Everything was the focus on me. So whatever I was learning and experiencing and choosing was from me, about me, for me. It doesn't mean it was not a clean and easy situation. It meant that all of the origin of what I was doing started with me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you whether it was a smooth experience, or was it varied, as you say, because it was all about you, really, and in a way, coming home to yourself, or starting the process of coming home to yourself. I'm, curious to know what that was like in terms of in terms of a progression over that period.
It was not easy because I didn't have a plan. And I think I presented myself as having a plan. I mean, I thought I had a plan, but I really didn't. And I don't know as if I would have been able to do what I did if I knew how unprepared I was. Maybe it's like one of those people that go out for a daily hike and then a storm comes and they find themselves unprepared and sleeping in a cave. It's just, I wasn't prepared. And I think it was good for me to not be prepared. it was actually easier to leave the situation I was living in than it would have been to stay and live in a wonderful home. So it was really the right choice for me. And I had experiences along the road where people affirmed, strangers, situations affirmed what I was doing. I was also doing my own personal healing work while I was on the road. So that's not something that changed. And there were some scary moments. I mean, I think I've been scared 3 times in my life, and 2 of them happened on this trip. And I also grew closer to that which supports me. Every time I had a difficult situation and really was getting broken or feeling broken, I was reminded that I am always supported and that I am always taken care of. And it was a constant contraction and expansion of being reminded of being taken care of always, always.
So it sounds as though, I mean, it was a major uprooting, really, that you did. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't kind in some ways, it was kind of throwing yourself out of the nest and seeing what it would be like to fly in a way, to just experience yourself as you are.
That's beautiful. That's exactly what I'm saying.
And not an easy one, I can imagine. And do you want to give us a bit of context of what led up into you deciding to pick up? Were you working at the time?
I wasn't working. I was working part-time, but I wasn't working in any regard that I would need to change something. Like I said, I've been able to do work that has inspired me and that I feel connected to. So I wasn't obliged to a job. What led up to it was my own internal, I knew I was going to leave. I knew I wasn't happy. I knew that I had lived more for the people around me than I was living for myself. And I felt like that was something that was going to show an obvious conclusion.
Okay.
So I was having this internal experience, but I really needed to emotionally, really needed to be away from my life.
And how was the experience of, because in a sense, what I'm hearing is that there was movement that needed to happen, and that there was something that needed to just be moved. And so if I had to bring up the word, movement, how does that tie into your experience?
I feel like, and that's a great question, and I'm feeling like that movement there was an initiation that happened, that needed to happen. And I feel like movement created that initiation. I couldn't have been initiated the way that I was if I was staying in one location. I didn't feel, I'm someone I've traveled all over the world, and I can't stay put. Traveling to me connects me to people and to myself. So movement did create an initiation that I don't think I could have experienced had I stayed local last year.
So, I mean, that's interesting, because I must say, just in doing a bit of reflection myself, as in, leading into this conversation and thinking of you moving around and finding that perhaps there is something in this thing of needing to get ourselves moving, because I know for myself that when I pick myself up and take myself somewhere different, I know we have a couple of ladies, at least, I don't know about Silvia, but Angelica and Janet have mentioned how much movement is also part of their landscape and of what they do. But how for me, the most phenomenal magic happens when I just either get in my car or on an aeroplane or step out the door and leave home, my physical home, and go on a bit of an adventure and see what the world has to offer.
And yes, and this trip was different because I've traveled all over and I've had situations but I always had my home to come home to. So this is the first time that I didn't have my home waiting for me. So it was even more of a more permanent or more, yeah, it was a more permanent change. I can do anything if I know that I have my home waiting for me, you know, as, you know, a building with my bed. This is the first time I've traveled in 25 years that I didn't have that. So I had to create it and become it for myself. And really what it's done is helped me create it more within myself and also be more present and more aware to anyone who's across from me, because I learned so much on the road by being in relationship to people. Of course, I always am, and I was even more so because maybe I needed it more, or I was more aware of myself. And this morning, reflecting on the conversation to be here, the practice of self-acceptance under any circumstance is what I've always provided to others, but I had not yet until this trip provided it to myself.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. And also how the dropping of all those things that I spoke about at the beginning as well, of which is probably what drew me to start to initiate this conversation with you, the dropping of all those things that sometimes create that distance between ourselves and others, and or whether they be physical things or whether they be mental constructs and thoughts and ideas, but just of how much value it is to be able to actually drop some of those. And sometimes that does require significant sacrifice, you know, having to give up significant things in our lives.
I agree, yeah. I just had a friend who had an Airbnb. She had a 10-person Airbnb, and she just sold her home, and she's leaving her work and she sold another business. And I could support her in that because I've done it myself. And it's very, you know, it's very easy to be there for someone else after I had done it myself.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's quite something. I think also to have you know, walked the road. I often think to myself, one needs to have walked the road before one can lead anyone else in that regard. You can't lead someone in an experience that you haven't had yourself.
Right.
So it's very beautiful that you were able to support a friend and a person in need on their journey of needing to drop stuff as well.
Yeah, yep. And I think authenticity and groundedness and self-acceptance, those are all things that I walked away with. You know, I think in some regards internally, it was always, I was defended a lot in my life. I felt I needed to defend things in my life, and now I have completely I've made peace with those things, and I don't need to do that anymore. And I find myself a lot more, you know, having a lot more happiness.
Beautiful. And Meghan, the temptation, I mean, I just, you know, you're a real inspiration in terms of, particularly because of the sense I get that you have or have had a comfortable life. And I mean, in perhaps a material sense, it's not even that I know that much about you that I can say that, but that, and I certainly know that from another perspective, and I know this also because of my own experiences, that from perhaps a more internal self-worth, self-authentication, self-validation perspective, that the journey has not been easy for you. And of course, it's not the end of the journey. And the temptation is to ask you, well, you know, when are you going to find home? Or where are you going to find home? When are you going to put down roots? And I'm not going to ask you that question. unless there's something you want to answer around that, because I don't think the journey comes to an end. But before we do that, I actually, because also holding awareness of time, maybe you want to answer to that, and then I want to invite Janet, Silvia, and Angelica in also to ask their questions, to share what.
Yeah, I think my present living situation, I think just like where will home be? I think it will show itself when I am home with myself. I'm just not finding something that's really it right now. And also I recognize that 22 years of living in one town and then 5 months of being on the road, you know, there's going to be a time of settling that's going to take place. So I'm going to allow it to take place, and it may not even be in this state at all. I mean, I'm already thinking about where I want to go. So, but it is a real gift to come back here, to have learned and to burned off a lot of what I did, and then to come back here and be with the relationships that I had. And now I can be the person I wanted to be. Now I can be who I am now in relationship to them, rather than losing that opportunity. So it's perfect that I would come back to where I started.
Beautiful. And I know that wasn't necessarily by design, that wasn't by intention, to be set out. So it's very beautiful that you've just allowed what needed to happen. And I suspect and have a feeling that maybe it's not even perhaps what you might have wanted if you had been more in control of the situation.
And you know what, and that's good. And we'll stop. Well, I mean, I'll end on this, but it is not what I wanted at all, because I pictured myself somewhere else. And really what it came down to after 5 months on the road and not finding anywhere, which astrologically I realized was never going to happen because of where I am on my in my astrology right now. I think my ego is really healthy for me to be able to come back here, because the only place I wanted to be was not here.
Beautiful. So on that note of not wanting to be here, just
Here.
sharing with you that I'm still here, and 5 years ago I thought I'd be in a very different place, and I am in a very different place, but at the same time the same place. I'm going to go ahead and ask the others to unmute and come, forward with, so we can have a bit of a conversation.
Yeah.
So welcome back, Silvia, Angelica, and Janet, and just please join in wherever you'd like. We've got, let's say, 10 minutes or so to talk, so just bearing that in mind. What would you like to, would you like to make any observations, ask Meghan anything, or reflect anything back to Meghan? You're welcome to go ahead.
What a beautiful story, Meghan. Thank you so much for sharing it. It's absolutely beautiful. My experience, also having uprooted very many times, and maybe also that was my destiny, and I wanted a new adventure, and I jumped on it too quickly. But whenever I came back to the same place, I realized I had developed, but the people that were there, they hadn't had the same journey as I had. Is that something that you struggle with now, being in the place where you started?
That's a great question. And it's such a great opportunity to have this conversation at all with you ladies. So thank you. I feel disappointed that I gave away a lot of myself to people that I came back. I don't mind that they haven't changed, but I mind that I actually gave away so much of myself that if we go for lunch now or go for a walk now, that so much, if I'm not always pumping the conversation, there's not a lot there.
Yeah.
And Meghan, thank you. I'm sorry I missed you.
I know.
We were both travelers last year. It was so interesting and powerful for me when you said, how it feels to not have a home to come back to, because that's what happened to us too. And I still don't have a home. We're renting 4 months at a time, a little bit here, a little bit there. And yes, I'm back in Colorado, but not in the same towns. So that sense of not having a place to return to, I would love a deeper exploration with you at some point on that.
Yeah.
Because it is, I feel unmoored in a sense. And what's fascinating about that is the sense of creating a home where you are, but still that longing for a home. Do you have that also?
I think the longing part is really like extinguished or exhausted. I don't know which. But I find that if there is a longing, then I build it within myself even more.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
I'm not aware of it if it's there, but yeah.
Yeah. After it's almost a year for me of moving around,
Wow.
that I really wanted to just go,
Yeah.
all my stuff's in storage. I didn't sell it. So bravo to you. That was incredibly brave. But we put our stuff in storage. My husband and I were doing this together. So I wasn't alone in it, so to speak. But it's a pretty powerful pull to be in the world. That's how I felt for me. So it sounded like for you, there was a knowing or a pull, even if you quote unquote didn't plan well.
Yep. I felt more compelled to go out the front door and sell my house than I did August of last year to stay home and wait for what was to come. It felt awful. I mean, it just, everything. I was so very supported. It was the perfect time.
Yeah.
If I had stopped to think about it and I didn't feel supported, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Janet, thank you for sharing that. It's a beautiful, mirroring in a way for Meghan of a situation of being without a home under different circumstances, very different circumstances, and perhaps more of a yearning to find where your physical home is, or to have that physical home as a center. And yeah, so more questions than answers perhaps at this point, but still important to ask the questions and to live in the question of what this is.
If I could chime in with something that is building on everything that was said. So what you've been discussing, Meghan, was really what it brought back to me is, of course, I asked myself the question, so how does this look like for me? And when I realized, and I was surprised about it, yes, we have this home here. I have no idea for how much longer, but for the moment. And what I realized is that I know that if something goes really wrong, my home, interestingly enough, and I didn't realize that, is still the home I grew up in. My parents still live there. And I just did not expect, and I think that's clearly a cultural difference as well. In the US, you're much more used to, moving and your family not necessarily still living where you grew up. Whereas in Austria, that's the norm, that the family home remains the family home forever. And I didn't realize that it's only the questioning that got me there, that got me realizing that. And it's interesting because I'm in this place right now where I know that sooner or later, within a year, maybe a year and a half, too, we're going to sell this house. And I'm in the process of a separation. So there's a certain uncertainty also, like, will I be okay? And I didn't realize how much that knowledge, I can always go there. If everything goes wrong, I'll go there. And I didn't realize how that I was actually leaning on that. I didn't realize it. So I appreciate your story made me aware.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful thing. And I think that maybe the world we're living in is that nobody knows how long they're going to be in their home. And I'm grateful that I had a choice. You know, there's so many circumstances that could have happened that didn't. So I had a choice. But to know that some people don't know, it's like nothing that seems solid or real in any particular day is actually solid or real. So I feel like I put myself out there so I could be with anybody who doesn't have to be a house, but anybody who has a situation that's, you know, a dramatic change in their life. I want to sit with them or be with them or listen to them, because this world is not necessarily, you know, reliable right now. So I think I'm a stronger person for the benefit of others. It's really why I do my personal work, is for the benefit of humanity wherever I am.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
So that's interesting, Sylvia, bringing that different perspective of the family home, and perhaps again raising questions for yourself and for the rest of us around that, you know, that home of origin, how much it is to be leaned into. Some people don't have it. Many of us perhaps don't have that anymore. But do we have a home of origin, or don't we? And reflecting on my own particular story, that I'm still sitting in a home. I divorced 5 years ago. I'm separated and divorced 5 years ago, and I'm still in the family home. So not my parental home, because my parents aren't together anymore, and we've also moved several times. And in any case, they were from Spain. So there were all sorts of things about where home is. I sometimes feel, well, is my home here, or is it Spain, because most of our relatives are there. And of course, I have a sense of that. I very much feel South African, but very strong ties to that as well. But in terms of selling my physical family home, I didn't think that I'd still be here in this physical structure. And Angelica knows a little bit of the story around this, but I more or less decided I might not do that. Meghan, you are wanting to ask something.
Well, I just want to say I was thinking to myself that sometimes there's a wonderful home and it works, and then there's something that just starts to not work. So
effectively, what I'm saying is the picture is not what I imagined it would be, because I would never have imagined that following this year of lockdown, it would be a space that I'm in right now. And it might change, because I think it can change at any point. But what I really wanted to say was that I still, while staying in the same physical structure, so just referring to the physical existence and the material things around me, I've stayed here, but I've really moved away from so much else and opened myself so much more to the world around me, without having to leave the physical structure of my home. And I don't feel a calling to go anywhere else at this point, which obviously can change at any point in time. So I've lived in, Janet, I didn't do an introduction of myself at the beginning, but I think as you've gathered, I'm South African, and I've lived in South Africa most of my life, but actually of Spanish origin, Spanish parents. So it's just interesting how it's a different story, and the question is of where is home.
yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how much you guys are into astrology, but I know that in my astrology chart, like the wound that I live in this lifetime happens to be around home. So, you know, this looks different for me because it has different implications for me because of that. But what do I get in return? I get self-acceptance. I get opening my heart to humanity. I get a more authentic and authentic experience of myself in the world. It's a lot better than being in a house that I love, that I created, that was amazing, and being safe and alone, than it is to be on the road and alive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to bring in one quick thing. I know we're at the end, is that sense of letting go of control and know you're fully supported. That was pretty powerful. So thank you for sharing that. I feel that too.
Mhm.
And so just, I think we'll look into closing the conversation more or less here. So perhaps just by each giving a reflection on a phrase or couple of sentences to Meghan on how this experience has been for you. And just a line that I'll throw in as well of that perhaps we are leading each other home. That comes up very powerfully for me, that we're leading each other home, and particularly in coming together in different ways and as women sharing stories about our lives.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, go, if you'd like to just say a sentence or two to end, that would be great. And then Meghan, you can have the last word.
Thank you so much, Meghan, for sharing your story. I think it's beautiful to letting go and still feel supported. So I will definitely take that with me, that coming home is not to a physical place, but it's actually to yourself. So thanks a lot for sharing.
You're so welcome. Good to meet you.
Thank you, Meghan, for sharing your story and deeper conversation. Absolutely. Would love that. One phrase really stuck out for me is the movement created an initiation.
Mhm.
Wow. I'm taking that and I'm putting that in my heart
Mhm.
and taking it with me throughout the day. Thank you for that.
Good. Yay.
Beautiful.
Well, I'll chime in. Thank you very much, Meghan. That was very interesting. And what I particularly loved is this reminder of, when you break all your bridges, that and all you have is you and whatever you have with you at that time, that you're fully in the present. I mean, there's nothing more present than that. And that's what I'm guessing you may have even meant with this initiation, the movement and the initiation. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvia.
And Meghan, if there are a few words you'd like to share before I will have a few things to say sort of for closing, but.
So some people knew that I had shown this, that I had a ring made. So I had a color that was really a beautiful, the ocean, that was an accent in my house. And I had a ring that was made. It's an aquamarine.
Oh, yeah.
And I had this with me my whole time. And I always had myself as the first piece of jewelry, second, but I had this made for myself, and it was around home and the colors in my home. So I always had this with me. So it's like I always had myself with me.
I mean, and that's so beautiful. And thank you for reminding us of that, Meghan, because in fact, we could say that ring was the leading into this conversation, because certainly it was for me what triggered and evoked when you mentioned once before to me in a conversation we were having as a group, that the ring was enough to anchor you, having left your home. It represented your home for you, and was kind of the segue or the bridge between the physical home and the home in your heart.
Right. Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Thank you for reminding me of that.
Something it helped me. It's certainly been very powerful for me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we are nearing the end of our conversation, and as I said, it would fly by way too quickly. I'm sure we're all feeling that we'd like to carry on talking, and there's so much more that we'd like to share and talk about, and we don't want to let each other go because it's beautiful. While interestingly, we're not together in the physical. In a sense, we are together in the physical, because even this connection via the internet is connecting our physical bodies together, bringing us together in the physical. So we're not as far apart in different corners of the globe as we might think we are. All we are is an internet connection away nowadays, which is so wonderful to know. And I reflected earlier this afternoon on what it was that I could leave you with, because I didn't want it to feel as though we've just come together and then this is the end. So just to share with you that the intention that I've put forward today, on this powerful day of initiation of new intentions, is to create a small, maybe, network. I don't know if it's small. It doesn't have to be big. Small is big, I think, and big is small. It doesn't really matter which one it is. But the important thing is a small and connected, is a connected network of women through these conversations. And just to let you know that there will be opportunities to attend again, either as the guest being interviewed or as a studio guest again. And that my intention, as I've said to you in the email that I sent, is to also share these conversations with a broader platform. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and we can all say, goodbye to each other.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot to everyone. Bye.